Hey, YouTube and Instagram, it's Gordon Miller. Welcome to Live at 5. All right, so we're getting started a few minutes early, and which is all good. Hopefully, making up for the time when we didn't start at all, or we started half an hour, 45 minutes late. So, let me pull this down just a little bit. All right, so today we're going to take a look at the two books, one by Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and the other one, The Thank You Economy, by Gary Vaynerchuk. So we have a number of different topics that we'll be covering. I have four more sessions already outlined. Great suggestions by a number of you folks. So I appreciate all the ideas and suggestions. Please DM me on Instagram or leave ideas in the comments, and I'm look forward to the opportunity for to get to all of these. So aside from the book reviews and touching on some of the books, we have some ideas about adapting to some of the service businesses during the thank you economy, which I've helped a number of friends kind of transition into opportunities like that. So I wanted to kind of cover that. I got a request for talking about internet in the developing world, and it's really an interesting idea, and so I want to cover that in depth. Also, ideas about or requests about more traditional businesses that are not technology based, and then the other request is for my thoughts on the cannabis industry. So those are going to be the five things over the next five sessions. We'll do as much as we can today. It's Friday, so it's date night. So I'm gonna, make sure I'm out of here right at 6 o'clock, if not before. And if we have some interest in one of the other or one of the other four topics, then we'll take a look at at some of those as well. So without further ado, let's get to the two books that I think really sort of changed my life for the better. One of which was Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And so about the only thing that I found truly enlightening in the books was what was the idea of the cash flow quadrant, which for me was really kind of interesting. So the idea of exchanging time for money, which is being an employee, and so that's one of the ones that everybody's pretty familiar with. And then I think one of the things that people didn't, realize, I certainly didn't realize, that when I decided to start my own company, a significant amount of the revenue that we were generating was coming from the work that I was doing. And so, even when I was billing out at my maximum rate and billing out my maximum number of hours, we were still making, well over $1 million. But about 40%, about 1.2 million, and about 33%, about 400,000 or more, was coming from direct billable time that I was doing. And then I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and realized, man, all I did was create a really good, high-paying job for myself. And so there's nothing really wrong with that, except, it's one of those kind of things that as I got older and realized that, man, I spent all this time and all this money, and we're making millions in revenue, and we're hiring, multiple people and things like that. And, the more money we made, the more people we hired, the more expenses we got. It really was one of those kind of things where it became a lot less fun, actually. I mean, it's one of those kind of things where I think that the whole idea of the cash flow quadrant has been to talk about how to exchange money and time, and then how to sort of shift your time and how to focus on that. So the interesting thing about that for me was back in 2003 to 2004, I knew in 2003 that I was going to relocate to open the Richmond office, and I was going to do more work in DC and other things like that. But I knew that a majority of our work was still being done in our Blacksburg office, and so the opportunity for me was to figure out how in the world I could devote most of my time, to work that we're doing, to building the company, to getting more contracts, and go completely non-billable for a couple of years. So I've made some comments about this before, but not necessarily within the context of Rich Dad Poor Dad. And so the thing for me was that I made a conscious effort to stop billing. And that was in order to go from an employee to what I essentially was self employed. I'd created a really high paying job for myself to the next quadrant over, which is a business owner. And the business owner has other people working for them. So when you go on vacation and you're not you're not working on something for a week, you're still making money because other people who aren't on vacation are working and you're making money. And we always did that. I mean, we always had a number of employees that were working on stuff and billing their time and making money off of that. But I still was spending an enormous amount of my own time focusing on my billable amounts. And because, what I had to do was I had to actually give up 400,000 a year worth of billable revenue for 2 years as I made the transition. And that was the transition that I made in '04 and '05, in 2004 and 2005. And it was tough. I had to go from completely billable to completely non-billable. So, it was one of those kind of things where you take an immediate drop of $400,000 in revenue, and then you take another hit of another $400,000. But it was because I did that I was able to focus on capturing new opportunities and building the business. And where our contract size went from just over 1 million for a typical contract to now over 2 million. And so we doubled our contract value, which of course netted me a lot more than I would have made if I had remained billable. But it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to actually go through that. And it wasn't until I read Kiyosaki's book that I really also realized that the ultimate objective is to move through the phases pretty much as quickly as you can, which I didn't. I worked for somebody else as an employee for several years. I worked for my father's company for 5 or 6 years, and I worked for the university for almost 7 years. So, totally, I put in about 13 years of being somebody's employee, and I learned a lot. I really enjoyed that, but it was the fact that, okay, so I had a lot of time and effort that I had put into being an employee. And when I started the company in '93, I had basically created a really good job for myself. And when I was making as much in a month as I made all year long at my regular job, then I decided, well, I'm just going to have to quit my regular job. This doesn't make any sense. And then that's when the company kind of took off. But it really wasn't until I would say 2005, maybe even 2006, 2004 at least. And so from 1993 to 2004 is 11 years. So it really took me almost 11 years to figure out the fact that, I had created this 11-year opportunity where I was a highly paid employee in my own business. But I don't recommend that people do that. It's one of those kind of things where, uh, if I was smart, I probably would have spent less than 13 years as an employee, probably between 5 and 10. I do recommend that everybody have at least 5 years of actual work experience as an employee before starting their own company. Now, depending on when you start, if you're going to start working at age 18, then hopefully by the time you're 23, you have some relevant experience and you can use that to your advantage when you start your own company. So for me, it was a situation where I should have spent about 5 years as an employee, about 5 years on the self-employed model where I was billable and then made that transition, and then I should have spent another 5 years as a business owner growing the business and things like that. That would have put me sort of 15 years down range, and that would have been 13 years from my 20th birthday. So I would have been like 33 at the time that I started focusing on the investment side. Well, on the investment side, I started in 2008. when I started G3I Ventures with my partner at the time, Bruce Froelich, and that's really in response to having read Kiyosaki's book a few years before and realizing that eventually getting into the investment side, and being an investor is kind of the ultimate objective of all this. It's not to be a highly paid employee in your own company or to be a business owner and run lots of people and things like that, but to make enough during the successful times of the business to be to get to the investor role. And so, typically if you start when you're 18 or 20, by the time you're 33 to 35, you should be pretty well positioned to invest in stuff if you've done the hard work along the way. And I think that's one of the things I probably regret the most. And just in terms that I was born in '64, so by the time I figured it out, it was 2008. What is that? 34 years? I guess it's about the same then, right? Did I do that math right? That's maybe maybe I was right on track then. So let's see, 2008 minus 1964. No, 44 years. So, right. So I kind of wasted essentially 11 years of my career waiting too long in each one of those stages. So, employee, and then self employed, then business owner, and then the other quadrant is as an investor. And so I took 44 years to get to the point of what I probably, if I had the right context, could have or should have done in about 33 to 35 years. So essentially, I wasted 10 years of my life, not doing the right things. And even Kiyosaki's book doesn't put the right perspective on it. And so it's one of the kind of things that, I wish that there was a little more perspective on that. And I hope that's what these videos will do, is provide some sort of additional perspective on that, because I believe that my experience has been great up until this point, and so I don't regret anything, even some of the delays. But I mean, overall, it's one of those kind of things that I'll be 56 later on this year, and I've been working since I was 10 or actually 14. But I was working on the weekends at my father's gas station. So I've been working for 40 some years. But for me, it's an opportunity to be able to figure out what kind of the ideal pacing is. And I don't think that I haven't seen where they really talk about that too much. It wasn't brought up much in Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, but there is a follow-on book, The Cash Flow Quadrant, that may deal with that in some more detail. But from my own experience, about the only thing I can say is that I recommend everybody have at least 5 years of actual experience with another company. Then, being self-employed for 5 years and kind of figuring out the mechanics of business, whether you hiring a couple of employees or working with consultants or things like that. 5 years where you're self-employed, and then 5 more years kind of really focusing on building the business and things like that. That's 15 years. And then the next rest of your career should be pretty much focused primarily on investing. And so by the time you're in your early 30s, early to mid 30s, you should be able to continue to kind of evolve some of your activities in that direction. And between the time you were, say, 35 and 55, like I am, you would have a 20-year head start on where I am. And so I think that's important. In fact, one of my good friends and partners, Daniel Mazer, and I were talking about things like that. I mean, he's 21 now, and we've worked together on a couple projects. And I really do enjoy working with the latest generation of entrepreneurs. I think they have a lot to offer. And I forget that, they don't have the 20 years or more, 30 years of experience. And so it's hard to, remember sometimes, when they're wrestling with certain concepts for the first time, and it's great to see them kind of learn as they go along in some of the opportunities. And so it's really kind of refreshing, and it's one of the things I really enjoy about working with the latest generation of entrepreneurs. And but that's really kind of the idea for Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I think the most I think you should get one important thing out of each thing that you do. So for me, that cash flow quadrant idea, and moving through the cycles really as quickly as you can. A lot of people get caught in this trap. I've noticed. I met somebody the other day who was in his late 50s. I think he's like 58 or 59, and he's had his own company for 40 years. And and I was like, dude, man, I mean, ever since he was 18, 19, he's been killing it. And the problem is that now he's looking to retire, and he's like, man, everything's just all built on me. And I'm like, yeah, man, that sucks. I mean, because you never bothered to delegate, you never bothered to bring on all the other employees that were needed. You never bothered to structure the company so that it could survive without you. I mean, damn. I mean, that's horrible. Because now he's like, what the fuck do I do? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I mean, that's a tough call. I mean, you got to find somebody to come in and run it, and you got to find somebody who wants to take your place, and you got to do some kind of revenue share thing or something. I mean, you got to figure it out. And so it's kind of tough. I mean, it's one of those kind of things where I'm glad I learned my lessons along the way, and I got to the point where I am now. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work in the investment side of things, and work on a number of opportunities at the same time that give me an opportunity to see things grow, and continue to prosper. So that's great. And of course, it's funny. Everybody seems to be getting younger, and so where I guess they, technically I'm probably getting older, but it's the funny thing is that watching the entrepreneurs today that are 20, 21, or the ones that are 25 or even 30. And it's just funny to watch. The whole world is run by 35-year-olds, which it's like, look, I've been doing this for 27 years, so I've been doing this since you were in elementary school. So it's kind of tough sometimes when you see the world shifting. So anytime I see somebody who's executive levels, either C level or even a large company executive level person, in their 30s, it's always humorous for me. It's like, man, I've been doing this shit longer than you've been alive. So it's funny, but that's the world we live in. So that's one of the interesting things about getting older. And hey, I'm 55. I'm not 75. So I'll be curious to look back on these videos when I'm 75, and I hope I'm still doing live at 5 when I'm 75, and I get to go, I remember back in the day when we were talking about the world being run by those 35-year-olds, and now those 35-year-olds are 55, and they're bitching about the world being run by 35-year-olds. Mm. So anyway, but so the other book I wanted to talk about is Gary Vaynerchuk's The Thank You Economy. And, this is one of the things that I think really had a profound influence on me in a lot of ways. And I mean that in all the best ways possible. So uh, I believe in a lot of things, actually. I mean, I actually believe in there being a higher power. I believe in all things happen for a reason. I believe everything's part of some grand plan. So I believe you can't say anything is bad or good. It just is, and we don't know the reason for it and things like that. So I mean, it's all good. But I do think that the world works on a concept of gratitude, and I think that when life tends to go wrong or more wrong for people, it typically is because they're not as grateful for whatever opportunities they do have. And I think the thing that I've seen, which is really kind of amazing, I've gotten to know people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and things like that. During the uh, during the 10 weeks that I drove Uber to prove how the business model works and things like that for my upcoming book. The I met a lot of people who are making less than $10 or $12 an hour. That it's $12 for an Uber ride to work, and it's going to be $12 for them to get a ride back. And so they're going to work 8 hours, and so two of those 8 hours is what it costs them just to get back and forth to work. But the people who I felt really could least afford some things in this world were often the happiest people that I had a chance to meet, and it was really kind of a life changing experience for me. So the great thing about that was, I asked people, I was like, man, you were just in such a great mood today, and I'm taking somebody to work at the Amazon warehouse at 4:30 in the morning, and they're like, man, I'm happy. I'm grateful. I've got a job. I've got a place to live. My kids are all okay, and I'm just thankful. And I'm like, wow, man, that's when you know that you've kind of figured it out. And so I think the great thing about the Gary Vaynerchuk book, The Thank You Economy, just really talks about things kind of happening and going in your direction when you